It was a calm Sunday morning in September 2024. The golden sun had just begun to bathe the small town of Everett, Missouri, in soft, amber light. Birds fluttered across tidy lawns, and the distant toll of church bells called the faithful to prayer. It was a morning like any other in this quiet Midwestern town, predictable, serene, unassuming. But something would happen that day, something so extraordinary, so utterly impossible by human standards, that it would pierce through routine and demand the attention of the entire Catholic world. At the heart of this unfolding mystery stood St. Cecilia's Catholic Church, a modest brick building tucked between two maple-lined streets, with its slanted roof, aging pews, and a bell tower that had seen decades of baptisms, weddings, and funerals. It wasn't a place known for grandeur, but it was sacred. It was loved. The 10:30 a.m. Mass that morning was well attended. Families gathered in their usual pews. A few elderly parishioners sat near the back, clutching their rosaries. Children fidgeted quietly beside their parents. At the altar stood Father Elias Martin, a priest known more for his gentleness than any dramatic homilies. With his slightly hunched frame, warm eyes, and voice that never quite rose above a reverent tone, he had served St. Cecilia's for over 12 years. That day, he moved a bit more slowly than usual. Earlier that week, he had twisted his wrist while lifting boxes of donated food for the parish pantry. The injury wasn't severe, but it limited his ability to perform some parts of the Mass with full freedom. So for the distribution of communion, he arranged, as is customary, for 2 trained extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion to assist. Their names were Angela Morno, a school teacher and lifelong parishioner, and John Dwyer, a retired firefighter known for his deep devotion and quiet demeanor. Both had served many times before. Both were trusted. Nothing about that Sunday suggested it would be different. The liturgy flowed gently. The readings were proclaimed: Isaiah's promise of new life, Paul's letter on perseverance, and a gospel passage from John where Jesus says, "I am the bread of life." Hymns rose softly, incense drifted heavenward, and the Eucharistic prayer was spoken with deep solemnity. At the moment of consecration, all heads bowed. The bread and wine, lifted and blessed, became for the faithful gathered there the very body and blood of Christ. And then came the moment that would change everything. Father Elias, cautious with his wrist, handed the sacred ciborium, the golden vessel containing the consecrated hosts, to Angela and John. From his experience, he estimated there were about 60 hosts inside. Enough, perhaps, for most of the congregation, though attendance that day was slightly higher than usual due to a local confirmation retreat bringing in visitors. Angela moved to the left side of the church, John to the right. The communion procession began. At first, all was ordinary. One by one, parishioners stepped forward, bowed, and received the Eucharist. The familiar rhythm unfolded, the quiet whisper of Amen, the gentle click of heels returning to the pews, the occasional creak of wood under weight. But midway through the line, Angela noticed something strange. She glanced into her ciborium. There were still many hosts inside, far more than she expected. She shook it slightly, perhaps they were stuck together, but they weren't. In fact, the more she distributed, the more full it seemed. She frowned, hesitated, then continued. At the altar, Father Elias observed. He was used to reading subtle cues. Angela was calm, but her eyes flickered toward him as if seeking assurance or explanation. John, too, had noticed something. His ciborium, which should have been nearly empty, was not, and now it appeared even fuller than before. Both ministers were now glancing more frequently between each other and Father Elias. After communion concluded, Father Elias slowly walked to Angela and gently received the ciborium. He peered inside. His breath caught. It was full, not half full, not just enough, full, more than it had been when he handed it to her. He immediately turned to John. The same, a vessel that should have been close to empty now brimmed with the consecrated body of Christ. He did not panic. He did not speak. He simply bowed deeply, lifted the ciboria to the altar, and placed them there with trembling reverence. For the first time in his priesthood, he felt he was touching something outside time, something sacred and strange, a divine interruption. After Mass, there was no immediate announcement. Father Elias remained quiet, leading a short closing prayer and gentle recessional hymn. Parishioners left slowly. A few noticed his stillness, his extended genuflection before the tabernacle, the way he lingered near the altar as if unsure what to do next. Angela and John met him in the sacristy, wide-eyed. "I kept giving and giving," Angela whispered, "but it never emptied. Father, I don't know how." John simply nodded, his voice low. "I thought I was imagining it, but I'm certain. There were more hosts when I finished than when I started." Father Elias said nothing for a moment. Then he spoke quietly, deliberately. "We will report this immediately, and we will pray." The Diocese of Jefferson City received the call that same afternoon. As is standard procedure, they responded promptly, not with declarations, but with questions. Was there a miscount? A duplicate ciborium? Could hosts have been added? Were unconsecrated hosts mistakenly used? But Angela's and John's testimonies were clear, and Father Elias had personally counted the hosts earlier that morning. There was no other vessel, no additions, no errors in preparation. The diocese sent a representative the next day. Word began to spread, not as gossip, but as sacred curiosity. People returned to St. Cecilia's the following week, not for spectacle, but for prayer. The church remained open longer hours. A simple note near the sanctuary invited all to pray for discernment. Ask for faith. He is here. Father Elias finally addressed the parish during his Sunday homily. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I know what I placed in those ciboria. I know what I saw after communion, and I do not have a rational explanation. But I do believe that the Lord multiplied himself, that in the hands of his people he gave, and gave, and gave again." This was not hearsay. It was not a private vision. It was a public, visible event witnessed during one of the holiest moments of Catholic worship. And now the Church had to respond, because this was a potential Eucharistic miracle. And if it was genuine, it wasn't just a mystery. It was a message. A message to a tired world, to a distracted church, to anyone who had forgotten what it means when we say, "This is my body." The church has always approached miracles with care, not with disbelief, but with discernment. And so, when word of what happened at St. Cecilia's reached the Diocese of Jefferson City, a quiet but methodical process was set in motion. The church does not rush to declare the supernatural. It waits. It asks. It prays. On Tuesday morning, 2 diocesan officials arrived at the parish. They wore no cassocks, no collars, just plain suits and solemn expressions. One was Monsignor Adrian Kessler, the Vicar General. The other was Dr. Marie Lafontaine, a theologian and canon lawyer trained in Eucharistic theology. They entered the sacristy not as skeptics, but as stewards. Their task was not to prove a miracle. It was to rule out everything else. Father Elias welcomed them quietly. He had barely slept since Sunday. His heart carried both awe and burden, the weight of something sacred, now watched by the world. Angela and John were both present as well. They had agreed to give sworn written statements. Marie began with practical questions. How many hosts had been prepared that morning? Where had they come from? Were there other vessels nearby? Had anyone had access to the sacristy before Mass? Angela answered slowly, carefully. "I saw Father place the hosts into the ciborium himself. There were maybe 60. We always used the same container. It was locked away after Saturday's Vigil Mass." John added, "We didn't add any more. We just kept distributing. It felt like the line would end, but the hosts wouldn't." Marie and Adrian took notes. Then came a pause, and Marie asked a different kind of question. "Did either of you feel anything unusual, spiritually, I mean, while distributing?" Angela hesitated. "It's hard to describe, but yes. I felt this stillness, like time was soft. There was no rush. It was as if each person was being met individually." John nodded. "Same. At one point, I thought, no way I have more, but then I looked down and I did. It didn't scare me. It humbled me. Father Elias spoke gently. I cannot explain it, but I know what I saw, and I cannot deny it. Marie and Adrian exchanged glances. There was something here, something they couldn't dismiss with inventory charts or procedural checklists. Outside the parish, whispers began turning into conversations. Local news outlets caught wind of a mystery at Mass. Parishioners who had attended began sharing cautious testimonies with family and friends. But this wasn't sensational gossip. There were no viral TikToks, no Instagram reels. This was reverent, sacred. Even those curious treaded lightly, unsure what exactly had happened but aware this was not just another Sunday. Meanwhile, the Chancery Office issued a short statement. The Diocese of Jefferson City has opened a formal inquiry into a reported Eucharistic phenomenon at St. Cecilia Parish. We urge the faithful to remain prayerful and patient as we discern the facts with care and reverence. At this time, no conclusions have been made. The language was intentional, no exaggeration, no dismissal, only an invitation to pause and pray. As part of the investigation, an inventory was conducted of all consecrated hosts used in recent weeks. Church records were reviewed. CCTV footage from the sacristy used for security, not surveillance, was checked. It confirmed no one had entered between Saturday night and Sunday morning, except Father Elias. The ciborium itself was examined. It bore no mechanical flaw, no false bottom. It was a standard, solid, consecrated vessel. The remaining hosts were reverently preserved in the tabernacle, as always. Nothing appeared altered, except for one undeniable detail. They should not be there in that number. Monsignor Kessler remained cautious. He had seen cases before, reports of weeping statues, glowing crucifixes, unexplained fragrances. Most were explainable. A few were never solved. But this had weight. This is not a private revelation, he told Dr. Lafontaine later that day. It happened in the liturgy, during communion. That carries serious implications. Marie agreed. If this is real, it's a reaffirmation of Eucharistic truth at a time when belief in the real presence is declining. That's no coincidence. By Friday, the Vatican had been notified, again not to declare anything, but to maintain transparency. Any Eucharistic phenomenon, especially one of multiplication, is taken with the utmost seriousness by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. While awaiting further guidance, the diocese sent a team to conduct interviews with multiple parishioners who had attended the Mass. Among them was Linda Ramirez, a nurse in her 40s. I wasn't even paying much attention at first, she confessed, just going through the motions. But then I looked up and saw Angela hesitate. I remember thinking something's off, and then afterward, people around me whispered that the vessel didn't empty. Another was Caleb Myers, a teenager who had returned to church after drifting for a year. I didn't even believe in the real presence, he admitted. I came 'cause my mum dragged me, but after communion I don't know. I felt different, like I was part of something not fake. I stayed after. I prayed. I haven't done that in months. Their testimonies weren't dramatic, but they were sincere. And slowly, a pattern emerged. That weekend, Father Elias stood once more before his congregation. The church was fuller now, not with tourists or thrill-seekers, but with hearts stirred by something they couldn't explain. His homily was brief. The Eucharist, he said, has never been just a symbol. It has always been a person, and sometimes that person reminds us, unmistakably, that he is still here, not as a memory, but as living presence. He paused. I do not claim certainty. That's not my role, but I do claim reverence. And I ask you, receive him with awe, live as if he is real, because he is. That week, a photo surfaced online. It was not dramatic, just a snapshot taken by a parishioner after Mass. In it, the altar glowed softly in the stained glass light with the ciborium still on it, awaiting repose in the tabernacle. But the caption read, I saw it with my own eyes. There were more hosts at the end than at the beginning, and I felt peace. He's here. It was shared quietly, mostly among Catholic Facebook groups, private forums, and messaging apps. No sensationalism, just witness. The investigation was still ongoing, but faith, it was already multiplying. By the second week after the reported miracle at St. Cecilia's, the news had quietly spread beyond the Diocese of Jefferson City, not through mainstream headlines or social media frenzy, but through whispers, emails, and text messages between believers. Priests mentioned it in homilies across Missouri. Theology professors at Catholic universities began discussing it in their classes. Some called it the multiplication in Missouri. Others simply said, he multiplied again. But amid the growing attention, the Church remained deliberate. No official judgment had been made. The investigation continued, carefully, reverently, with attention not just to facts, but to meaning. Because at the heart of this story was not just a possible miracle, it was the Eucharist itself. And in today's world, that means more than ever before. In 2019, a Pew Research study revealed a startling truth. Only 31% of U.S. Catholics believed in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, that the bread and wine truly become his body and blood. The rest, many believed it was just a symbol, a beautiful ritual, perhaps, but not reality. The numbers shook the Church. It wasn't just about belief statistics. It was about the crisis of understanding. How had the central truth of Catholic worship, the very heart of the Mass, become so misunderstood? And then, in September 2024, in a modest church in Everett, Missouri, something unexplainable happened. The Eucharist multiplied, not in theory, not in private vision, but during public Mass, seen, touched, and received by many. It was as if heaven responded to the crisis with a sign. Monsignor Adrian Kessler, still leading the Diocesan inquiry, spoke privately to a local seminarian group at St. Louis Seminary the following week. "We are not here to prove God," he said. "God needs no proof. We are here to honor what may be one of his gentle interruptions, a reminder, not just to believe but to adore." Theologians around the country began weighing in. Dr. Alana Morty, a professor of Eucharistic theology at Ave Maria University, said in an interview, "If this event is confirmed, it joins a rare but powerful line of Eucharistic miracles that confront modern skepticism head-on. We live in a time where mystery is dismissed and everything must be explained. But the Eucharist has never asked to be explained. It asks to be received." Meanwhile, stories kept surfacing. A woman from Kansas City who drove 3 hours to pray in the church's side chapel reported a moment of unexpected healing, a chronic hand tremor that ceased during silent adoration. A man from Oklahoma left a note on the church's prayer board. "I haven't been to confession in 15 years. I went today. Thank you for reminding me he's real." None of these things were part of the official investigation, but they mattered. Back at St. Cecilia's, the sanctuary took on a new stillness. Not performance, not spectacle, reverence. The altar servers walked slower. The tabernacle was visited more frequently. Confessions doubled. Daily Mass attendance quietly rose. Father Elias Martin began offering adoration of the Blessed Sacrament every evening, just an hour of silence before the Lord in the monstrance. No music, no homily, just stillness. And people came, not for answers, but for presence. They knelt, wept, sat, sighed. For many, it was the first time they had ever truly paused before the Eucharist and believed, even if they didn't know why. The miracle, if that's what it was, had awakened something, and that something was hunger, not for drama, but for the divine. The young college student, Claire, who returned home during fall break, sat outside the church one evening and told a local reporter, "I always thought the Eucharist was just symbolic, but then I heard what happened here, and I realized maybe I never really gave him the chance to show me he's real." Her words echoed something Pope John Paul II once said, "The Church draws her life from the Eucharist. It is not just a part of our faith, it is our faith." And perhaps that's exactly what this event was about. Not about multiplication of hosts, but multiplication of belief. Across the country, conversations began picking up in Catholic circles. Articles appeared in diocesan bulletins. Podcasts invited guests to speak on the theology of the real presence. Parishes initiated catechesis programs to reteach what the Eucharist really is. At St. Mary's in Chicago, a pastor dedicated his entire Advent preaching series to Eucharistic miracles through history. At a youth retreat in Texas, the story of St. Cecilia's was shared before adoration, and teens sat in silence, some crying, others journaling. And at a small Benedictine monastery in Oregon, one monk simply wrote in his private reflection journal, "In a time when the Eucharist is neglected, forgotten, doubted, the Lord chose to multiply, not to impress, but to remind." Meanwhile, the Diocese of Jefferson City released a second statement. "Our inquiry remains ongoing. While no definitive conclusion has been reached, we encourage all the faithful to take this moment to deepen their understanding and reverence for the Blessed Sacrament. Whatever may have occurred, it has already borne fruit in many hearts." The statement was cautious, but also clear. This wasn't just about proving a phenomenon. It was about reviving a truth. Behind closed doors, the Vatican had begun informal review of the case. While it may take months, even years, for any official declaration, the dicastery was reportedly impressed by the clarity of testimonies, consistency of witness, and the absence of any attempt to sensationalize. That alone, in the modern age, is rare. There was no marketing campaign, no YouTube documentary, no books rushed to print, just quiet awe. And maybe that's why it mattered, because God doesn't always shout. Sometimes he multiplies himself softly during the communion rite in a town most of the world has never heard of. And through that mystery, he speaks. In one of his final interviews before retiring, Bishop Thomas Glenn, shepherd of the Diocese of Jefferson City, reflected, "We are not seeking miracles. We are seeking Christ. But when miracles come, we receive them with trembling joy." He paused. "The true miracle is that every Mass, whether we see it or not, is heaven touching earth." This one moment simply reminded us of that. And so, St. Cecilia's continues. No banners, no tours, no signs that say site of a miracle, just a small church, now filled with more silence, more reverence, more belief. There is a silence that follows a miracle. It's not the silence of confusion but of awe. And for many who encountered what happened at St. Cecilia's Catholic Church, that silence lingered long after the Mass ended, long after the questions were asked, long after the cameras quietly left. It wasn't just that more consecrated hosts appeared than were placed in the ciborium. It was when it happened, how it happened, what it meant, because every Catholic, whether newly catechized or deeply devout, knows what the Eucharist is said to be. Not a symbol, not a metaphor, but Jesus Christ himself, body, blood, soul, and divinity, under the appearance of bread. And yet we forget. We forget when we rush through Mass. We forget when we receive communion without preparation. We forget when we reduce the altar to routine. But heaven hasn't forgotten, and sometimes God breaks through, not with thunder, not with fire, but with bread, and sometimes he multiplies it. The Church has seen this before. In Lanciano, Italy, in the 8th century, a priest doubted the real presence. During Mass, the host in his hands visibly turned to flesh. Later scientific analysis confirmed it was cardiac tissue from a living person, still fresh, still human. In Buenos Aires, 1996, under the oversight of a local bishop named Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who would later become Pope Francis, a consecrated host was left in a tabernacle. Days later, it transformed into bloody tissue. The sample was tested. It too was cardiac muscle under severe stress. In Tixtla, Mexico, in 2006, during a retreat, a host began to bleed while in the hand of a religious sister. Lab results showed the blood contained human DNA and white blood cells still active, meaning it came from living tissue. None of these stories are myths. They've been investigated, analyzed, studied, and remain medically unexplainable. Each points to one truth: the Eucharist is not bread. It is a person. And now, in 2024, in Everett, Missouri, another chapter may have been added. Not one involving bleeding hosts or visible flesh, but abundance. A quiet, unmistakable multiplication during Mass. like the loaves and fishes, but this time it was not fish. It was Christ. In his final public address before handing the case over to the Vatican's theological advisors, Monsignor Kessler said something that many would quote for weeks. This miracle, if confirmed, is not a spectacle. It is a summons, a call to return, to reverence, to awe, to the altar. His words resonated because many Catholics, especially in the Western world, have grown numb to mystery. The sacred becomes sanitized, the holy becomes habitual, and the liturgy becomes another appointment in a busy week. But the Eucharist has never been routine. It is, and always has been, the summit of the Christian life, the source of grace, the real presence of God. And sometimes, he reminds us, since the event at St. Cecilia's, dozens of parishes across the US have initiated Eucharistic adoration programs. Some resumed 40 hours devotions. Others created catechesis series titled The Miracle of the Altar. Confession lines have grown in parishes where the story was shared. In one parish in Idaho, a group of teens began praying the rosary before every school mass, something they said they hadn't done in years. In a small prison chapel in Florida, a deacon shared the story with 6 inmates. One man, serving a 25-year sentence, broke down and said, "I thought Jesus stopped showing up, but maybe he never left. Maybe I did." That's what miracles do. They don't just defy science. They wake us up. Father Elias Martin, now regarded by many as the reluctant messenger of this moment, has remained quiet. He still offers Mass with the same soft voice, still lifts the chalice with trembling reverence, still pauses before the tabernacle a little longer than most. In a private retreat reflection, later published with his permission, he wrote, "I used to think God's miracles were for faraway lands, long ago. But maybe he is just waiting for hearts that can see, because he has never stopped coming. He has never stopped multiplying. It's us who have stopped paying attention." The Church has not yet made a definitive declaration, and perhaps it never will. Some Eucharistic miracles take decades to be officially recognized, if at all. The bar is high, as it should be. The Church is slow, not because it doubts God, but because it takes God seriously. But even if Rome never stamps a seal on what happened in Everett, Missouri, the people there already know. They know what they saw. They know what they felt. They know that something sacred passed through their church that morning, not for fame, not for thrill, but for faith. And perhaps the miracle wasn't just in the ciborium. Perhaps it was in the hearts that were rekindled. The mother who returned to daily Mass. The teenager who stayed to kneel in silence. The man who wept after 20 years away. The countless who now whisper at every communion line, "My Lord and my God," because the real miracle isn't that God multiplied the hosts. It's that God still multiplies himself in every parish, in every Mass, in every moment when bread becomes Christ. And he will do it again tomorrow. So, what does this miracle mean? It means he's not done. It means sacred things still happen in small places. It means we're not alone, and it means, above all, that the God of the universe still chooses to come humbly, daily, quietly hidden in what looks like bread. In the end, that's the miracle that matters. Not that he multiplied once, but that he still multiplies himself for us, every single day, at every Mass, at every altar, in every heart willing to believe.